It was an intense day in Parliament today, ladies and gentlemen. The opposition parties today closed ranks against the government over the recent border clashes with China in Tawang. Now, this is what had happened. Last Friday, Chinese troops carried out an incursion or an attempted incursion into Indian territory. They attempted to cross the line of actual control near the Yangtze border post in Tawang. It was a bid to change the status quo along the eastern sector of the LAC. Now, these Chinese soldiers, around 300 of them, were resisted by Indian troops who were deployed in the area. This led to a physical altercation between the two. This was more than dhakka mukki. Both Indian and Chinese soldiers suffered minor injuries, after which the situation was de-escalated. But this clash, this altercation, call it what you will, went on for more than a couple of hours. The soldiers were carrying bricks and sticks and stones, so there was stone pelting on either side as well. At least 9 Indian soldiers have been injured. There have been some broken ribs and some fractured limbs as well. The number of those injured on the Chinese side is high. We are being told it's almost double of the Indian casualties. Soon after this clash, as is protocol, commanders from both China and India carried out a flag meeting to restore the status quo. Defence Minister Rajnath Singh today, 3 days after this incident happened, made a statement on the floor of the House. He did not reveal the exact nature of the injuries or too many details of what happened, but according to reports, as I said, at least 9 Indian soldiers have been wounded. They are currently being treated in the Army Hospital in Guwahati. The Defence Minister also said that not an inch of Indian territory has been ceded, a line that the government has maintained ever since the standoff began in eastern Ladakh 30 months ago. First, listen in to what the Raksha Mantri said.
9 दिसंबर 2022 को पीएलए ट्रुप्स ने तवांग सेक्टर के यांगसे एरिया में लाइन ऑफ एक्चुअल कंट्रोल पर अतिक्रमण कर स्टेटस को एक तरफा बदलने का प्रयास किया। चाइना के इस प्रयास का हमारी सेना ने दृढ़ता के साथ सामना किया है, अध्यक्ष महोदय, और इस फेस ऑफ में हाथापाई भी हुई है। भारतीय सेना ने बहादुरी से पीएलए को हमारी टेरिटरी में अतिक्रमण करने से रोका और उन्हें उनकी पोस्ट पर वापस जाने के लिए मजबूर कर दिया, अध्यक्ष महोदय।
Now, every single opposition party is spanning the government. And why not? If these clashes happened on Friday, why wasn't the country informed earlier? Why wasn't the parliament informed earlier? Every time there is a Chinese incursion, the government tries to downplay it. And that's what the Chinese are counting on, says the opposition. The PLA continues to salami slice Indian territory and the government continues to be in denial is something that the opposition has said through the day today. The fact is, you cannot solve a problem if you do not accept it in the first place. If you want to rally the country against China, put all your cards on the table. Tell the people and the parliament what is actually happening on the ground. Because all these shadow games and denials will be counterproductive in the end. Opposition MPs raised similar demands in parliament today. Listen in to all the political reactions that have come in.
The statement of the Honourable Defence Minister says nothing more than what is reported in the newspapers this morning. He might as well distributed copies of the newspapers. It says nothing more, not a word more of what is reported in the media as early as 6 o'clock this morning.
जितना इन्होंने 200 शब्द में स्टेटमेंट दिया, इससे ज्यादा आप सबके पास जानकारी है। क्या सदन इसके लिए है? अगर हम राष्ट्रीय सुरक्षा और अखंडता के लिए हम एकजुट हैं, अपने सब जवान को एक मैसेज देना था। आज सरकार नाकामयाब रही है और सरकार कम से कम चाइना के बरक्स, मैं हमेशा ये कहता रहा हूं कि चाइना के बरक्स ये लोग ब्रेजेंट डिनायल में रहते हैं।
So the statement that was made did not really give information as to why there was this delay between the 9th till date. On the entire clashes took place on the 9th and the delay in the defence minister telling the country about it. Secondly, it only came after a newspaper broke that story. So somewhere down the line, accountability that is being sought is not being honoured by the treasury benches.
Any kind of incursions by the Chinese should not be tolerated, and we should show our strong support to our army and to our soldiers for having stood up with such exemplary courage against this kind of transgression. I think it's very clear that we have to really redouble our strength in the Tawang sector. It's clearly an area of particular interest to the Chinese, and we will have to make sure that we stand for the territorial integrity, sovereignty and defense of India.
So that's what the opposition is saying. You've already heard what the defense minister has said. In fact, the defense minister said the exact same thing after the clashes in Galwan as well. No one intruded, not an inch of land was taken from us. If not an inch of land has been taken from us, why have we had 16 rounds of Corps Commander talks? What are we talking with the Chinese? But after Friday's episode, that's becoming hard to believe. Remember, the government sat on this information for 2 entire days, 3 days actually, because it happened on Friday. And today is Tuesday, and today is when the government officially acknowledged what has happened. The parliament was in session, but there was no attempt to inform the MPs about what had happened. Everyone got to know via newspaper reports and television reports. To be honest, today's statement was more of an afterthought. The news had been flashed by every single newspaper and media channel. Only then did the defense minister give a statement in parliament. That too, it was a very brief one. Like I said, the opposition is closing ranks against the government. They have accused the defense minister of being in denial about repeated Chinese incursions. Hyderabad MP Asaduddin Owaisi has moved an adjournment motion seeking a full discussion on Friday's clashes. He did join me earlier today. Listen into what he said. Raksha Mantri has already made a statement on the floor of the House, both in the Rajya Sabha and the Lok Sabha. Why are you then still accusing the government of deception? They'll say we've said what we had to say.
Well, madam, as far as the incident of 9th is concerned, the statement is given by the Modi government on the 13th. This incident happened on the 9th of the morning and the parliament was in session. So the parliamentary norms and convention demand that if such an attack takes place on an Indian territory, on an Indian soldier by a foreign country, and that happens to be China, which is now adversary to India, the government should have made a statement clearly. But the government was compelled and forced to do after the media reported this incident. Secondly, please remember, this is not a normal patrolling clash. The experts have clearly told us that the Chinese camp is at 17,000 feet below. They come up 17,000 feet and attack Indian soldiers. What does that tell you? It clearly tells us the mindset of the PLA army. It clearly tells us that the Chinese wants to make it an Indo-Pacific flashpoint in the Himalayas. And thirdly, this government has never told the truth to the nation. Take the example of Doklam. The Prime Minister said disengagement happened. No, it did not happen. The Chinese have now forever embedded over there. Secondly, the Prime Minister told the nation, na koi gusa hai, na koi gusega in Galwan. Now we know that Demchok and Depsang, 1,000 square kilometers is under the control of the PLA. Thirdly, you know, the whole disengagement which happened in Ladakh, we cannot even patrol those areas. So this government is hiding the truth. This government is scared to name the Chinese aggression. And thirdly, lastly, please remember that this incident happens after not even a month has passed since the Prime Minister stood up, turned around and walked and shook hands with the Chinese leader. And after shaking hands, we see this. So this is going on a continuous way. Unfortunately, Prime Minister Modi is not able to show the political leadership which this country requires right now. He's just scared to mention the Chinese aggression. That is why it is very hard to believe. And this government cannot hide behind the bravery of our army soldiers. You know, nobody is questioning their bravery. We are questioning, in fact, we are raising a huge question mark on the political leadership that is not being shown by the Prime Minister. He's scared. He has deliberately misled the country at Doklam. He deliberately lied this country as far as the issue of Ladakh is concerned. And now this third incident is happening.
Mr. Owaisi, we'll come to the politics of it in just a bit, but in your experience as a veteran parliamentarian, what is the precedence in such cases when Parliament is on? Is the government under any compulsion to inform the House about what has happened, especially on an issue as sensitive as a clash with China? Because the Deputy Speaker is very clearly saying that they are under no compulsion to tell the opposition anything.
Well, firstly, I'm not a veteran. Don't go by the grey hair on my beard. But this Modi government is suffering from a disease called political amnesia. Do they know that when the war was going on with China in 1962, the parliament discussed that war? We are not at war with China so far. We are talking about how this government has failed in protecting our land, how this government is keeping silence on the Chinese aggression. So the parliament has all the right to ask this question, and the Chinese have very well understood what Mr. Modi is suffering from. Mr. Modi is suffering from a thing called that he has to be, he has to be always popular. The Chinese know very well that they have understood Mr. Modi's nature, that he will never tell the country that the Chinese have occupied, are in possession of Depsang, Demchok. The Chinese very well know that Mr. Modi will not tell the country that people who take their animal to graze in winter, they cannot take their animals to graze. The Chinese very well know that the Prime Minister will not tell that in Doklam the Chinese are embedded. The Chinese very well know that Mr. Modi will never say that the Chinese PLA is the main aggressor. That is why this government wants to maintain a radio silence.
But Mr. Owaisi, the government is saying and accusing actually the opposition and politicians like you of politicizing an issue that pertains to national security. If there is a time for the country to be one, it is this. If there is a time for politicians to be one, it is this. And yet what the opposition is doing is pushing the government to a corner to politicize the entire matter, nothing else.
More the reason to expose the shallowness, the carelessness, recklessness, and the deliberate radio silence being maintained by the Honorable Prime Minister himself. This is an issue which does not pertain to any Gujarat election or a state election issue. This is an issue which pertains to my country, to an aggression which is being done by the Chinese army. That is, it is a more issue to ask pertinent questions of the government. Where is the question of politicizing it? I have all the right to question the government if they are failing to live up to their duty in protecting the land and the soldiers of my country. There is no politicization. It is BJP who is politicized. And please remember, let me put a counter question to the BJP people. Had they been opposition now, what would have been BJP doing? Had there been another Prime Minister from non-BJP party, what would BJP be doing now? Have they forgotten what they have done? I am not politicizing. No one is politicizing. The country is with the Prime Minister. We are questioning the country's Prime Minister's silence in not mentioning China. Why can't the Prime Minister allow a discussion in the Parliament? Why can't the Prime Minister listen to what we have to say? Why can't my Prime Minister condemn the outright aggression of the Chinese army? Trade imbalance is there. Still, our soldiers are being beaten up. The Chinese army comes from, they are below 17,000 feet. This is not a normal patrolling issue.
Mr. Owaisi, over and over again, you say, why can there be no discussion in Parliament? Possibly because, and this is the government's, argument as well, that there will be questions asked and the government cannot give you all answers on a public platform. So will you continue to demand a discussion in Parliament? Because, as I said, the matter is sensitive and not everything can be put out in a public debate, right?
National security, the nation wants and demands a discussion in the Parliament. If the government feels that it will be sensitive, then the government and the Speaker has all the powers to ensure that it is done in camera. But here what we have to say, the government has completely failed in stopping the Chinese aggression. And let me point out to you that since this new Chinese premier has got an extension, 75% Chinese military presence has been increased in Arunachal Pradesh. The same happened 2 years ago when the Ladakh crisis happened. This government has done, please remember, this government has done a military exercise with the Chinese army in Russia when they are the aggressors. So it is high time that the government allows, and here's what we have to say. You know, it is very important for the country to know from the opposition side that the government might get, he's our prime minister. The country stands with the prime minister, but the prime minister does not want to hear the truth. And the truth is that his silence, his reticence, his not showing political leadership is hurting India.
Mr. Owaisi, we'll leave it there for the moment. Thank you very much. Now, these clashes in Tawang are important for more than a couple of reasons. Number one, it is the first major reported altercation after the 2020 clashes in the Galwan Valley. Back then, around 20 Indian soldiers were killed by Chinese troops. China is also said to have lost soldiers, but they are yet to admit it. That is expected. So this particular clash is happening more than 2 years after Galwan. But what about the period in between? Well, the government may not tell you this, but there have been multiple standoffs along the LAC since 2020. Let me list out some of them for you. In January 2021, Indian and Chinese soldiers engaged in a physical brawl near Nakola in Sikkim. Army sources called it a minor face-off. In July 2021, PLA troops entered the Demchok sector amid the Dalai Lama birthday celebrations. Again, a provocation there. In October 2021, a few PLA soldiers were reportedly detained after they attempted to damage Indian bunkers. So this skirmish in Tawang, Arunachal Pradesh, isn't happening in a vacuum, ladies and gentlemen. The Chinese have repeatedly made attempts to alter the status quo along the line of actual control. The difference is that this time there were multiple injuries. So the government was forced to give a belated reply in Parliament because the reports were already out in newspapers and television channels. Now, there is some good news and bad news here. The good news is that the army is quietly and efficiently doing its job. Whenever the PLA soldiers get adventurous or aggressive, they have responded in kind. The bad news is that the government seems oblivious to what is happening. The Chinese leadership is clearly not interested in de-escalation. Their plan is to keep the LAC active, to keep putting pressure on India. Don't take the pressure off. And how does the government respond? By banning Chinese mobile applications. These gimmicks are simply not enough. The government needs to take the people and the parliament into confidence. It needs to be clear about what the Chinese are doing and how India is planning to respond. Because in Beijing, there is no such ambiguity. To understand why Arunachal Pradesh is a flashpoint between India and China, we must take a short detour into history. Just a minute, but it's important to understand what has happened on Friday and why it's important. China's first ruler, Mao Zedong, called Tibet the right hand palm of his country. And this palm has 5 fingers according to him. That's Nepal, Bhutan, Ladakh, Sikkim and Arunachal Pradesh. 5, which means China considers Arunachal Pradesh to be part of their sovereign territory. In fact, the Chinese call it Southern Tibet. Also important to note is the line of actual control. It was a dominant boundary for decades after the 1964 war, but in the last few years, things have escalated. There are tensions between the two countries. The LAC is the demarcation line between India and China. It is more than 3,400 kilometers long and is divided into 3 sectors. It has never been clearly officially demarcated, which is where all the problem arises. The western sector covers Ladakh. The middle sector is between Himachal Pradesh and Uttarakhand and the Tibet Autonomous Region. And the eastern sector is near Arunachal Pradesh. So where this clash has happened, the recent clash has happened, is in the eastern sector. The Galwan clashes in 2020 happened in the western sector. But this time round, China has provoked in the east near Arunachal Pradesh. And there is a worry there. There is a larger pattern there because what we have seen happen in Arunachal Pradesh on Friday is not regular. The Indian Army may be saying that it is because there is a difference in the perception of the alignment of the LAC, the standard line that is always used every time a clash like this breaks out. It simply doesn't hold for this one. Because what you saw were not 2 patrols coming face to face, ladies and gentlemen. what you saw was a contingent of 300, 350 Chinese soldiers making their way to an Indian post to dislodge Indian soldiers from there. So if anyone is saying that this is part of a regular pattern and that something like this has been happening since 2006, that may be misleading you. Is that misleading you? I'm going to put that question to our guests who are joining us this evening. Shweta Shalini is spokesperson of the BJP, who is joining us on the broadcast. Sujata Paul is spokesperson of the Congress Party. She's joining us on the broadcast as well. Major General Yash Moore is with us. He's a defense analyst. And Anil Triguniat is a former ambassador. He's joining us on the broadcast as well. Shweta Shalini, I'm going to come to you first before I go to the opposition voice, before I come to the army voice, and before I come to the diplomatic voice and point of view on the story. The parliament is in session. Norm is, convention is, when the parliament is in session and something like this happens, this is a major escalation. If something like this happens, the first thing the government needs to do is establish what happened and then inform Parliament. That didn't happen. The opposition is upset with you and they have a point. Do you agree that the opposition has a point to be upset with the government? And they have a point when they say that this is deception tactics that the government is using to say that the China problem doesn't even exist?
Okay, so Shreya ji, there are a couple of questions that you put in one question. So I'll tackle it one by one. First and foremost, you need to understand that the newspapers talked about it, the media talked about it, and then the opposition came to know. Second, in the parliament is a constitutional body, and hence it is very important for us as a government to give the right information in the parliament. This happened on a weekend, and hence it was important for the right information to be taken and then delivered in the parliament. So that's exactly what was done, and a statement was given today by the defense minister. Third and most important, I just heard Mr. Owaisi talk, and he said, oh, while the 1962 war was going on, it was being discussed in the parliament. But let me remind him, in December, in fact, on December 8th in 1959, when Nehruji was asked inside the parliament as to what exactly is the position of India, he had no idea, and he actually confessed in the parliament, which is recorded, saying that I have no idea of the position of the Indian territory. Now, let me come to Tawang and the current incidents. Let us understand exactly what happened. The Indian side and the Modi government has actually increased the BRO spend to about 40%. So there is a huge infrastructure work which is happening in the Tawang area. And this 17,000 feet is ours, is the Indian territory. So when we have the 17,000 feet, we are in control of everything that we are doing on our side. What Chinese want is that peak so that they can actually figure out as to what.
So Shweta ji, a couple of things. Shweta Shalini, a couple of things.
It's very clear.
Give me a minute.
Give me a minute. Let me finish. Then you can take a minute or two. So this 17,000 feet was very critical for the Chinese PLA during winter. This is December time, November, December time. Neither the Chinese, the PLA or the Indian troops actually do a patrolling there because it's extremely cold for the soldiers. But we must appreciate that our soldiers were on guard. They realized, they took action, and they pushed them back. The obstruction is gone now. So irrespective of now talking about the bravery of the soldiers and the position that Indian government has taken, there have been questions by the opposition, which is actually politicizing this issue. Now that is something that you need to be discussing on a debate channel rather than discussing what exactly the government is doing.
No, I need to discuss what the government is doing as well, because this is my government. I voted for it. And a lot of people voted for it, and I need to know what the government is doing. So please don't tell us what we should be debating on this channel. You know, I care two hoots about the politicization of the issue, but I do care. And just by the way, don't make this about questioning the Indian army and the ability to fight back the Chinese. We all know that. And I think everyone on this panel and every citizen in this country is a patriot. So let's not get there. And let's not call people who ask questions anti-nationals, because that is the increasing tendency in this country, Shweta Shalini.
Did I say that? Did you
Secondly,
hear
I just
that?
want to tell you that the
Did
defense...
you hear me
no,
saying
you don't
that
say
you
that.
are an anti-national?
Did I
so
say
don't
that?
feed words
Did
into
I...
my... Don't feed words
Shweta
into
ji,
my
sun to
mouth.
lijiye na.
I did not say that.
No, Shweta ji, that
I said that what we need to be discussing...
Suniye, I'm not accused... Did I... Okay, you have said what you need to be discussing.
Do you think
Secondly, I just want to
military
point
strategy...
out...
You saw 2611. You think
Shalini
military
ji,
strategies can be go ahead and discuss
Shalini
in the open?
ji,
Can the government go ahead and say what we are doing?
I'm going to ask that...
Person of the China
I'm going to ask that to the military
said,
person on this panel. I am going to ask that to Yash more. Give me a minute. But here's a couple of things that I do want to tell you. I want to tell you that the Defense Ministry doesn't sleep during the weekend or doesn't take the weekend off. The Indian Armed Forces don't take the weekend off, especially when it comes to things as serious as what has happened in Arunachal Pradesh. So don't tell me that it was the weekend, etc. The government had all information on day 1 and a clear picture on day 2. Yet it is only on day 3, after media reports have already put out all details, that the government decides to make a statement on the floor of the House, not giving much details. Let me put that question to Brigadier Yashmore before I get Sujata Paul of the... of course. And the army took that action on the first day, not the government. So don't take credit for that.
So
Major General Yashmore, I'm sorry, I apologize. I called you Brigadier there for a moment. Yeah, okay. Okay, the Defense Ministry took action. General Yashmore, what should I ask you? It's... one of the arguments that Shweta Shalini ji has also made is that these are military operations, and this is something that is an argument that has come from government quarters as well, that these are military operations, and you can't really discuss details of military operations on the floor of the House because these are things that cannot be made public. What is your sense on how things have played out for the last 3 days? Do you get a sense that the government is trying to underplay the China issue? Just, hope that no one speaks about it so that there is no focus on it. What's your sense of what's happened in the last 3 days and in the last 30 months?
Shreya, thank you for calling me for this important event. And we are all worried, and we were anticipating that China will try to do something now in Arunachal Pradesh, this particular area. It was clear from after Galwan, because so much of pressure was put on China in eastern Ladakh that they would have opened another front. And you are aware, India is going to host, be president of G20. A lot of meetings are going to take place. Plus, over a period of time, they want to keep the LC boiling somewhere or the other, keep pressure on India, and try and see if they can cause some kind of humiliation or some setback to Indian forces, which they know will not take place. Now, coming to this event, it happened on 9th, and the flag meeting, now we come to know, took place on 11th. It is because the soldiers got injured and probably they were shifted to hospitals down below that this kind of leak has taken place, or this information came out in the open domain. Otherwise, probably we wouldn't have known. And Shreya, I also must tell you that we call it face-off. These face-offs take place many times on the LAC with China. Sometimes it is a bit of pushing, jostling for space, or sometimes just showing banner and getting back. But this kind of belligerence, this kind of PLA military using riot gear, what they did in Galwan, exactly similar kind of amassing troops. Some say 300, some say 500. Nobody knows. None of us are privy to what actually happened. Amassing troops like that and attacking Indian soldiers at that height when it is not a season to go for a campaign, not a season to capture anything, seems to be well planned at the PLA level. Maybe even the senior Chinese hierarchy may be involved in this. So what does it indicate? It indicates that they would like to open another front, maybe keep this side of LAC also active, so that India keeps deploying troops and we keep, in this winter also we spend in this high altitude. So I find somewhere, I hope it is de-escalated now and flag meeting will resolve this issue. Hopefully it will not be repeated in near future if the military commanders talk to each other and they have a good understanding. That's what I make out of this situation. I won't like to get into any, political debate on the issue at all.
Okay, I understand that. As a defense analyst, you would not want to get into a political debate on the matter, but what you're clearly telling us is what defense experts and people who study military strategy are telling us, that what has happened in Arunachal Pradesh on Friday is not a regular patrolling clash. This was not 12 soldiers or 20 soldiers from each side clashing with each other. These were 300 soldiers, Chinese soldiers, climbing up a mountain post to try and dislodge Indian soldiers from there. Of course, they were unsuccessful because the Indian soldiers and the Indian army was tracking their movement. So it ended well there for India. Question is, why didn't we get an official acknowledgement from the Indian government? That is all I am saying. Why did the government not inform Parliament? Why did it? Shweta Shalini here from the BJP, Sujata Paul, is telling us that, well, at least it was out in the papers. Government ko kya bolna tha? Papers mein sari details to aa gaye the. So let me ask you that question then. Why is the opposition making such a fuss of it?
At the outset, I must say that we are extremely proud of our army, and that is the reason why today our borders are safe, not because of the government. And secondly, most importantly, we refuse to politicize this matter. But for us, not only is national security important, but also our soldiers. We haven't sent them to our borders to give up their lives. We are also responsible for their lives, Shreya, and that I should make clear to the BJP spokesperson. And the BJP spokesperson has also clearly said that the opposition got to know only when the matter came out in the newspapers. This means that the government is truly trying to hide what has actually happened. This Chinese transgression must not, should not have happened and must not go unnoticed at all. And if today we are asking questions, it is because the government, and you have already explained about what Mao Zedong had said about the palm and the 5 fingers. So I'm not going to go in there. And if we are aware of the fact that the Chinese are always going to try and destabilize our LAC, which is so very, how do I put it? It's so porous in a lot of places. Should the government not be aware of it, or is the government only blind about it? But the government has employed a DDLJ strategy. First, deny, then you distract, then you speak lies, and then you go and justify. So if the opposition is asking questions, it is because national security is important and imperative for us. And the Prime Minister has been a weak Prime Minister. There is no question about that. If you remember what happened in Bali, he, instead of showing red eyes, he's going and meeting the Prime Minister and the Premier of China in a red shirt. So what are we talking about? We must remember, you were talking about banning apps. I have some data here with me about India's trade dependency on China. You know, in 2021, we have had a record imports of $95 billion with a record deficit of $73 billion in China's favor. So when you're talking about diplomatic ties, I think Mr. Owaisi was talking about the exercise in Russia. Yes, September 2021, we were having normal exercises with China in Russia. What is happening? Should the government not answer? Should the government not explain how come China is trying to transgress? If you remember, some months back, we also spoke and discussed about this young boy who had been picked up by the PLA. At that time also, it was a BJP, elected leader who had brought this issue into public domain. So when we talk about our government is responsible, and it is our government. And we need to know how many such transgressions have happened, or as our defense analyst general said, that it is quite possible that there are a number of face-offs which happen. So if there are a number of face-offs, we do need to know that since June 2020, how many face-offs have happened? Or do you think that we don't have a right to know that? But I finally want to make 3 more points. And that is about how ill-equipped we are becoming.
No, give me a minute. Give me a...
Yes.
No, give me a minute here. Give me a minute here, ma'am. Give me a minute here. Shweta Shalini, what is the opposition asking for? The opposition is asking for a discussion on China on the floor of the House. Why is the government not accepting it? The government has still not accepted that there are incursions, by the way, in Chinese territory. Not an inch of land has been ceded to China is the constant line we hear. If that is the case, what have these 16 co-commander level meetings been for? Why are we talking to the Chinese if there have been no incursions? Ma'am, itna bhi जनता को बेवकूफ नहीं समझना चाहिए ना?
So do you have any proof, Shreya, you're sitting on a national news channel? Do you have any proof? You have a defense analyst here. Ask him that any piece of land has been conceded. So let's not say anything on national television which you do not have a proof of. We reiterate, not a single piece of land has actually gone
don't
to
insult
China.
our
Let's
intelligence,
understand. So don't say anything which you don't have a proof of. We are not Nehruji that we give out Aksai Chin and then not do anything about it. This Tawang that we are talking about
ना
right
कोई
now,
घुसा
and
हुआ
it's my
है,
chance to speak,
ना
so
ही
Sujata
हमारी
ji, please
कोई
keep quiet.
पोस्ट
You
किसी
need to
दूसरे के
understand
कब्जे में
this
है.
Tawang that
This
we are
is what
talking
the
about.
Prime Minister has
In
said
1951,
when the
till
Chinese
1951, it
transgression
wasn't
in the Galwan
Tibet
area
boundaries.
happened.
Thanks to
We are
thanks to
still
Nehruji.
Amazing.
not,
Your
Anil
we are
Trigunia.
still not
goes to a farmer
restored
movement and
status
says,
Shweta ji
quo
and
ante
Sujata ji.
in the
we don't
Kailash
need
region.
army
Shweta ji and
Can you
Sujata
give
ji,
us
if
what
you
we are
talk over
talking?
each other, I will not be able to understand what you are saying. एक minute, Shalini ji and Sujata ji, if you both speak over each other, एक minute, give me a minute, Shweta ji, I've given you a chance to speak. Sujata ji, I've given you a chance to speak as well. But if you speak over each other, I will not be able to understand what you're saying, and the viewer will not be able to understand what you're saying. Anil Trigunia, if that is the official line of the Indian government, that there has been no transgression, etc., then what are we hoping? Are we hoping that we don't talk about China so the situation will either solve itself automatically or it'll go away?
Well, Shreya, I don't think that we are not talking about China or we're not calling out China. I think at every forum, everywhere, if you come to think of it, the External Affairs minister has been talking about the border issues, that till the border is stabilized, there can be no normalcy with China. And we know that China's toxic behavior will continue. China remains the major challenge. It will remain the major challenge, not only on the borders, but in the maritime domain, as well as in other geographies. So this is something that we need to deal with on a daily basis. As far as incursions and these kind of attempts are concerned, they've been going on. They'll continue to go on. We have a 3,488 square kilometer of this border. So there is every possibility when the Chinese have these hegemonistic tendencies, when they see India rising to up to them, and able to confront them eyeball to eyeball, that is the point that they are not comfortable with. And so we are continuing to have that. At the same time, if you come to think of it, that this particular incident that happened after the Galwan now is when President Xi Jinping happened to be in Saudi Arabia. So one has to see whether it was the PLA. I don't know, I'm not a military person, but whether it was actually the patrol, because there are certain agreed disputed areas for both sides. And there is, in my view, what the LAC means is line as per the Chinese. So that's why they treat this kind of issues. But I think that the most important thing is we need to keep giving them fitting response. I don't wish to get into the political canards of this, but at the same time, I think that we have to be ever so vigilant in every which way possible, and try to confront them wherever we can, diplomatically, militarily, politically, and otherwise.
Okay, we leave it there for the moment. It was good to get everyone's point of view in here. Shweta, Shalini, Sujata Paul, Major General Yashmore and Anil Trigunia, thank you very much for joining us on this debate. It was interesting to get all your perspectives in, as I said.